Hey everyone, welcome back to another layout update. Significant progress has been made on the layout, both physically and sort of in concept. I don't really know where to start here. I guess I'll just go through the different elements of the layout that I have so far and some of my plans. Again, nothing is set in stone. These are mostly concept ideas, but things are starting to move along. I suppose I'll start with the bench work. And the biggest change that's happened is I've moved the entire layout's bench work over this direction about a foot so that I have space for a little sort of walkway in there. So now I can actually sort of get in here and work on stuff in this area of the layout. Previously that was pretty much impossible. I've also extended this triangular piece because it turned out that this wasn't enough to support the 060, so I put in this extension that's pretty flush. It's actually one of the better pieces I've put in. Again, it's very sort of rough and thrown together out of materials that I've had on hand, but it does the job, so that's all I really care about. I have pretty much all the track that I'm going to need for this layout. I recently bought all the 060 that I've required for the layout, and I've needed that for quite a while. It was kind of expensive, but it's worth it. Like, now that I have it, I have it. And I can continue work with the layout. And not only was I able to put in the outer loop, I've got the inner loop in conceptually. It's not screwed down or anything. It's not even connected electrically. I haven't run a single train on this yet, but the idea is definitely coming together, and it's a lot like what I was expecting. So fortunately, that's a good thing. Unfortunately, there's actually, for the most part, a lot of good clearance between the outer and inner loop, so I can have things like catenary poles in this median wherever I need to. Speaking of the inner loop, I'm planning on sort of building a industrial, I wouldn't call it a yard at all, but it's just a set of sidings that's supposed to give some play value to the layout. Like, this is just a rough thing that I threw together, but have a couple sidings here. This might be like a warehouse or something, and then over here, I might have an industry and some car storage or something, or that might be a pretend interchange, where I just go to the back and just remove cars that I want to get rid of, or pretend like they were sort of taken out by another railroad. But I also need a runaround track for this. I think that that'd be a good idea. Beyond that, I really like this. This still leaves ample room between all these tracks if I ever need to put in signals. I always sort of wanted to put in giant catenary gantry structures that sort of span over non-electrified tracks, so I might end up doing that. I'm still thinking about it, and that's definitely going to come later. And to elaborate on track work, the outer loop, I think the super elevation, at least in concept, is fully there. Tweaks will need to be made. I haven't fully tested it with all my equipment, but so far so good. I actually, since the last time I covered this, I went in and made the super elevation a little less extreme on this curve where I already had put it, because some pieces of equipment were having problems, and it wasn't super realistic anyways. It's still noticeable and still impacts performance positively, but it was just a little bit too much of an extreme, so I brought it down a bit. And I know that you couldn't really see it on camera, at least the way I'm showing it. Maybe you can still notice. I mean, I still have these little tiles in here supporting the track up. It's not noticeable at all, but eventually I'll do something more permanent than just wooden shims and these tiles. Potentially cut some stuff, like some strips of plywood that are curved at the right height. Those would be very thin, and that would be time-consuming, but it would be absolutely wonderful if I could get a very sturdy base in there for all of the tracks so it doesn't bow or warp between the points where I have it supported. And of course, the recently upgraded 060 part of the layout that used to be pretty much this exact track, the 048. Yeah, it's 048. This is super elevated too, to the same degree as the other one. So it's pretty consistent. Again, it's not final, tweaks will be made, but yeah, so far it's been a lot better. Again, talking about the track here, I'm really getting into having all these tracks next to each other, because this is about 5 tracks next to each other and the crossover point here. So really, at this point, you sort of have visually like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tracks next to each other, but 5 or 6 doesn't really matter. That's a lot of tracks. So I think shots from here, looking at trains going by over there and train switching here, would be really, really cool. And keep in mind, I can use as much of the real estate for track as I want on this level, because on the upper level, I'm going to do all my scenery. That's, like I think I've said, it's going to be an urban layout. And under that, I'm going to have all of my tracks. And all I need to worry about is leaving space for supports to hold up the scenery. But all my track is going to be on the ground level, essentially. So I don't have to worry about where I'm going to fit in buildings and whatnot. I can just have all these tracks and still do scenery, but just keep it above. Last element would be my catenary system. I've been doing some experiments with it and making some changes. So as you've probably seen, I've kept on building it over the past few months, slowly out to here, maybe about 3/4 of the way done. But I've had some changes of plan. First of all, I never really was super happy with the way that these looked. I mean, they're fine. I think they're presentable, especially when they're painted. But they aren't what I would call super realistic. Like when you see an actual catenary mast, I guess that's sometimes what they're called, they don't really look like that. So as you can see, the ones that I have over there, which I've been sort of, which are the more recent ones that I've built from scratch, they use a different method to sort of give more of a sturdy look. So basically you still have your typical, I used Plasticville telephone poles, and I cut off all the cross arms besides the top one. And on some of these I have wooden cross arms, some of these I have aluminum cross arms. But I have the cross arm, I sand both pieces and put them together with CA. I should probably make a video on how I put these together, specifically like a step-by-step construction. But then I put some CA glue around the aluminum pole and the cross arm of the telephone pole. Then I take twist ties, and as you can probably tell, those are actually twist ties. And I just tie them really tight around the two pieces, and it actually holds really good. Of course, in combination with the super glue. It holds okay without the super glue, just by a friction fit, but the super glue just kind of completely reinforces it. And then to add extra reinforcement, I have these these are styrene triangles that I just cut out. I made a whole bunch of them. And they're sort of that plate that will sort of connect the pole and the cross arm. So that's one development I've made, aside from a few minor tweaks to the cosmetics of them. I think this looks a lot better, looks a little more realistic, a little sturdier. Again, there's a lot more I need to do with these poles to make them look as realistic as I want them to look. They're not going to be based off of any prototype, but they are just going to be a general design. Another thing that I've been experimenting with is longer lengths of wire between poles. Mostly on the straight section back here, because on the curved sections, I think having multiple poles is not only realistic, but it's physically better. But here I've decided on the straight section to have longer lengths of wire. And like I said, I use HO rail as my wire. And this is 2 pieces of, I want to say like 10-inch HO rail, straight rail, soldered together basically. So we have the 2 lengths of rail, a rail joiner in there. I crimp the rail joiner tight around the rail, and then I solder the 2 together, make sure it gets nice and hot, and solder those. And it's just about as good as if I had a pole there. So now I can have more flexibility. You can see the train go by a little better. And I'll still be able to run stuff with pantographs up, and it won't really interfere with the wire too bad. But that's just a thought. And plus I'll be able to save on materials, so I might not even have to make any more poles to finish the layout, because I can just remove every other pole and just have a longer set of wires. The next thing I'm probably going to do is a major reworking of the layout, and that's going to consist of basically every element that I've mentioned. So first of all, I'm going to end up taking down the catenary lines momentarily so that I can sort of readjust everything. You know, take all the poles down, take the wire and whatnot down, because, well, number one, I want to upgrade the look of all these poles to be consistent with the, let me get this, the better design that I've shown here, and maybe even improve on that further. I also want to make sure where they're positioned is desirable, because the way they're positioned now has been very eyeballed. Like the way I install these, so I install them in a batch of maybe 3 to 6 at a time, and I just check with the pantograph. Oh, it's roughly in the right spot. We can just glue the poles down here, it's fine. And I use hot melt glue to secure the poles down, which is it sounds pretty crappy, but it gets the job done. But the problem with that whole thing was I didn't consider that everything is a system here, and if things weren't lined up just perfectly, things would eventually lead to problems. Then eventually your wires are going to start coming off of your joiners, and you're going to get stuff like that happened, and it's going to be super frustrating to deal with, and I've had to deal with that. So I'm going to end up making sure that everything is just perfect. All the wires are perfectly happy in the poles there, and I'm not really worried about expansion joints because this is an indoor basement. Temperature doesn't really change a whole lot. But once I take those down, I'm going to do a once-over of the bench work, make sure everything's all right, make sure everything's lined up, which stuff like this is definitely not lined up, and that could do with a major reworking. Next, I want to make sure all the track geometry and wiring for the track is perfect, because right now it's just sort of temporarily screwed in for the most part, at least on the outer loop. And there's only 2 feeder wires on the outer loop, which is definitely not satisfactory. And maybe somewhere in there that wall will see some refurbishment to some degree, because it's not looking so good. Also, in terms of track, I want to get the inner loop and the sort of industrial area figured out and wired up, and make sure that I can actually switch on it, because every layout that I've done before that involves a switching section, it's cool to look at sometimes, but if you're not going to want to switch on it because it doesn't run well, then there's a problem with that, and it's essentially useless. So I want to go in and really make sure that things like the switches and all the sidings and whatnot are wired correctly. Every single piece is getting a good amount of current through it. Nothing derails. That's a huge problem in this sort of yard-like setting, but basically just anywhere with a lot of switches and tight turns. So I need to figure that out. And then last but not least, I can sort of finalize a catenary system, so I can have a full running circuit that I can run electric trains on with their pantographs up. Anyways, I think that's probably enough of my rambling for today's layout update. I just haven't done one in way too long, and there's a lot of ideas going around, and yeah, hopefully this video was watchable for some of you guys, and yeah, things have been pretty good around here. So tell me how you've been, tell me how your layout's going if you're working on the layout, and tell me what you think of what I've been doing. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.